Hello everybody, thank you for joining this presentation. I am Flavia Caso from Wageningen University and Research, and I am co-chair of the Circular Food Systems Network. The network was launched in 2021, and after the launch we have about 120 active contacts that we keep in the loop when we have updates on the network, and from there we aim to create members for the network itself. So today I'll be giving you a short update on what we have been doing so far and some things that are in the loop for the coming year. So after the launch of the network, we financed several case studies that were region specific, let's say, and looked into circular food systems around the globe to see what knowledge gaps are still there and how circularity is being perceived in these different regions. And in order to keep people in the loop, we organized a meeting where the ongoing circular food system studies were shared, their progress, and exchange of ideas with the different members that joined the meeting. Next to that, we organized a webinar together with the Netherlands Bureau of Statistics, and they organized a specific 2-hour webinar on providing integrated data for the monitoring and analysis of agricultural greenhouse gas emissions and the circular economy. And then we organized a session at the Circular at Work conference that was held in April last year in Wageningen University. And here we organized a dedicated session where we invited several speakers, and these speakers presented their research on circularity within agricultural systems. And lastly, we kept our network updated through sending out newsletters and keeping them in the loop with the activities that we have been doing in the year. And accomplishments of the network of the last year. First of all, the first round of case studies have been finalized, and we've shared the reports of these case studies throughout our network. Then we wrote a white paper on circularity across the globe, which will be published this quarter, and it includes a reflection on how these differences in regional circular systems are presented and what knowledge gaps are still there. In the last quarter of 2022, we set up a new call for proposals based on the case studies and the knowledge gaps that were identified there, and we thought it would be interesting to finance new research projects that specifically looked into indicators for circularity in order to actually be able to measure circularity in food systems. So we selected 3 new research projects that will start this year, and all 3 are looking into indicators to measure circularity on different levels of the food system. So as we are quite fresh in starting new projects on these circular indicators in circular systems, we are interested to see what new research will come out of that specifically. One thing being the implementation and testing of the newly developed indicators across regional circular food systems, and how these systems can benefit from the developed indicators. But next to that, we see that circular food systems are often linked also to other sustainability goals. So interesting research opportunities would be to see the link with circular food systems and ecosystem services, regenerative agriculture, and the role it can play in climate mitigation and adaptation. And next to that, we think that because of the great variety in agricultural systems across the globe and how circularity varies within these regions, the designing of region-specific circular food systems is an interesting opportunity for further research. And what we always try to do is to link the outputs of our research with policy and climate action agendas in order to be able to implement circular food systems and create an impact with these systems. So capability opportunities, this is something that we haven't actively looked into the last year, but there are some things that we would like to point out that also came through our network and that we are sort of keeping an eye on in order to see whether we can join or give an interesting contribution, as it all links quite closely to the topics of the Circular Food Systems Network. First of all, there's this workshop that is being organized by the Future Food and Forest Bioeconomy Network of the Swedish University of Agriculture. The workshop is called Beyond the Green Transition, Circular Bioeconomy in 30 Years. It was supposed to be held in December of last year, but it was postponed to the beginning of this year, so it's still a possibility to join this workshop. And next there are 3 international conferences that for us are very interesting to look into. So I wanted to mention them here. First is the Circular Economic Conference in Brussels in February, the international conference called Closed Cycles and the Circular Society, which will be held in Greece in October, and the International Bioeconomy Conference that is called Deliver Circularity Now, which is organized in June and will be held in Germany by the Bioeconomy Cluster. So these are definitely interesting conferences and a workshop to take into account when you're interested in circularity. So now for the specific barriers and opportunities to achieve carbon neutrality in cropping systems. The barriers that we are stating here is also a little bit coming from our knowledge and experience in the research that we've been doing. And first of all, that is legislation, as we have been seeing that looking into different and new opportunities and new technologies in order to test them, we have often found barriers in the legislation, for instance, in the Netherlands to test these, because we have both EU and Dutch legislation that will sometimes block this. So this is definitely an important thing to look into when looking at new opportunities to achieve carbon neutrality and what needs to be tested in order to look at these systems. And the second point is, of course, coming from our focus this year to look at indicators and metrics for circular food systems. The same, of course, also goes for achieving carbon neutrality in cropping systems, as it's very important to be able to measure this. Otherwise, it can form a barrier. So this is definitely something to look into. It doesn't have to be a barrier, but it would be very interesting to see whether these indicators and metrics are there and what still needs to be developed when looking into carbon neutrality. So for opportunities, we would say that it is very interesting to look at on what level are we looking at carbon neutrality in cropping systems. Of course, in our network and on circular food systems, we are prone to look from a systems perspective, and this would be also very interesting to do when looking at carbon neutrality and seeing how cropping systems are integrated in the whole food system and the role it plays in the agri-food chain, and looking at carbon neutral cropping systems within, for instance, crop livestock systems, and integrate these systems in the whole food system. And it's definitely an opportunity to also take into account synergies and trade-offs with other sustainability goals, which is something that also we have been seeing in our research when looking at, for instance, carbon neutrality or lowering greenhouse gas emissions. What does this mean for instance, nitrogen cycles and ammonia emissions, and are there synergies and trade-offs when creating systems that hopefully, of course, achieves multiple sustainability goals. So this is definitely an opportunity to start with that from the start when looking at new cropping systems that are carbon neutral. So this was the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. If there are any questions, please don't hesitate to ask me and contact me.